Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I am Brendan Vanous. I'm the head of developer success for PlayFab at Microsoft. PlayFab is the backend service for video games. It provides a full suite of features for games like analytics, login, purchasing, catalogs of goods, all the things that you need that are fundamental to games for which you require backend servers. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about the ways in which a game is played and the way in which the data for that game affects the way it's played. Basically, it's all about real-time analytics and the way that they're used in PlayFab. So if you've seen any of the talks this week, this will be kind of familiar because we've talked about this a few times. Back 2000, 2001, you had basically one game that was in both years in the top grossing games list. But if you then fast forward to a couple of years ago and last year, 70% of the games from those years were in both years. And the reason is because these games are all games that are using live game operations techniques. So live game operations, it's any change that you make to your game that's designed for retention, for re-engaging with your users, getting them excited again about the things in your game. So it's focused on things like events. So we recently just had the St. Patrick's Day go by. We had a St. Patrick's Day events in a lot of the games in PlayFab because they're using that as one of the techniques that they use to give players a unique new experience in the game. Year upon year, these times come up and you can give them special costumes or rewards for playing the game at those times of year. And it incentivizes the players to come back again and again. So the things that would not fall into a live ops category would be the things that are more core to your gameplay mechanics. So actually new mechanics that you introduce into the game, new crafting modes and things like that. Those aren't really live ops because those are really the way the game is played. The live ops are more about the cosmetics, about the things that entertain people about playing the game, costumes and things like that. But it's also about sales that you run and being able to present different offers to different people at different times. And this is where games have been evolving to over the years, because back in the day, games were really about being just a packaged good. You'd wrap the game up, ship it out, and then you just move on to making the next game. I mean, you'd do some new content for it. You'd usually have the typical schedule where you launch the game and maybe you've got your 3-month, 6-month, 9-month marks for your DLC. But it's sort of you get the game up and then it trails off and then you have your long tail. But nowadays, games are services. You ship your game and now you've got a relationship with your players. So you get the game out there to market and you iterate upon it. You get feedback from your users. You study the data that comes from how people are playing your game and what they're doing with it, and you adjust over time for the ways that people like to play the games. Differentiating where possible to give different groups of players different ways to play the games based upon what they enjoy more. And that's really what the data is all about. Now, in any system, like even in PlayFab, we have a number of dashboards. On our dashboards, I'll show you those in a minute. Those they update every couple of minutes to give you the full view of what's happening in real time with your game. But really, that's just like the beginning of your journey in terms of discovering what's going on with your game, because this is just the fundamentals. It's how many people are logged into your game at any time, and how many purchases are being made at any time. And this is all fantastic information because obviously, if you suddenly see a drop-off in your sales, and you happen to have just made an update to a catalog or just started some new event, that's a pretty good indicator that there's something going wrong with your title that you need to be looking at. But like I say, dashboards are just the start. And vanity metrics, they're not something you can really act upon. So when the player logs in, you get a login event, and sure, you've got a lot of information that comes with that. And that is what leads you to having the login information for your dashboard. Okay, great so far. But then if you don't have as many logins as you think you need, what do you do? Where do you go from here with this information? You might have daily retention information about your cohorts. Now, if you look at this, you've got really good acquisition at the front of the funnel, so you know that your players are coming in at a good rate. But further down the line, you've got kind of weak retention. Okay, so why, right? What do you do with that information? Why have you got low retention there? So the idea is, for any time you're managing your game as a live service, you're going to have ideas about ways to improve it. Whether those are based on user feedback, whether they're based on the data that you're getting in, you got the idea, you test and try out those ideas, and then you get more data from that, and it's a cycle, right? Ideate, test, review the data. Sorry, I thought it was one slide ahead. So yeah, this is the cycle that you're going to go through for all of your games. And so an example of what that might look like is this. You take, for example, a game where you've got, a kind of a typical first day retention, right? Your first day retention is not going to be 100%. It's not going to be anywhere near. So that first day there, that acquired column looks pretty normal, but the level 1 does not. Okay, this is somebody has played into your game, they've spent a little bit of time getting used to it, but they're not being retained at the rate that you expect. So the question there becomes why? What's going on in the game that is causing people to drop off when you are expecting them to be in and play longer? So you're going to come up with a hypothesis. In this particular case, the game that we're looking at has an achievement for killing a boss. So you're looking into the data set that you have available, and what you see in there is, okay, so players are getting into the game, they're playing a certain distance in, but maybe they're having a hard time beating the boss. Maybe a lot of the players who aren't beating the boss are the ones that are specifically the ones dropping out of your game. Okay, so let's try and experiment with that. So you create an A/B test in the service, and your A/B test has 5 treatment groups. You've got your control, and that's the people who are just going to get the same experience as always, no changes. Make sure that you get exactly as it was before so that you have some control over this experiment. And then you've got 4 treatment groups that have a variation. In one case, it's after the player has lost to the boss, hasn't managed to beat him 5 times in a row, drop the boss for the next time to 80% of his normal strength. Another one, you've got, okay, after he loses 5 times in a row, drop him to 60% usual strength. Another group, you've got, we're going to make it after 10 times they lose in a row, drop them to 80%, and another 10 times in a row of losing, drop them to 60%. So these are consistent A/B test groups that you're putting your players into. When you create this, your player base gets bucketized into these groups so that each player will get a consistent experience according to the rules that you've set. So once you've done that, then you measure the effect of your change. Okay, and comparing this to the first slide, there is a significant change to the churn on that level 1 column. It's come up, it hasn't come up a ton, but it has come up some. So what you do is you then go back and you look at the data that you've received from those tests and say, okay, which one of these worked best? Was one better than the other, or are we seeing just sort of a general pattern across the board of people having better retention because they're in one of the treatment groups? Obviously, if it's one group in particular that does better, then you really want to just collapse everybody into that group, treat them all that way, because that's clearly going to be the best way to go. But this is just one thing. So then once you've finished that A/B test and you've collapsed everybody, then you'd start up another A/B test. You can do multiple A/B tests at a time, though the recommendation is if you're going to do that, make them be on things that are unrelated to one another. If you're trying to fix retention, changing multiple things at once is really risky because, of course, then you've got multiple vectors. Anybody here who's an engineer gets the idea. Too many vectors of input means you don't really know what change you made really caused the change to occur. But that's what we really built PlayFab to support. So we built out the fundamental core services, everything that we talked about on Wednesday. And the core services are things like authentication and data and catalogs. But we built it all with the idea of real-time data being at the heart of everything. So every action that takes place in PlayFab gets you an event. Every significant action, logging in, purchasing an item, new statistics updates, things like that. And you can use that as part of the play stream that we've devised in order to drive actions, user segmentation, all kinds of things for your players. Because modern games are really riding on their data, and their data is essential to making sure that they can adjust themselves over time for the needs of their players. And whether it's user acquisition, whether it's cross-promotion ads that you do, and what rates you get people to pick up on new games, tuning your game, making sure that over time you're saying, okay, well, players don't like this, they do like that, great, let's increase the power of these swords, let's decrease the speed of the jet, whatever it takes to find that right balance. And all of that can be stored in title data in the service, so that when you're reviewing the results of this data, you can take that and just tweak it automatically. No content updates, no certification passes. You just change it in the back end, and players are using the new data, and thereby getting the new experience. So when looking at this, you've got a few fundamentals for what really gives you actionable data. One thing is you've got to have a rich set of events. So like I said, all of the fundamental base functionality of PlayFab gets you events, but you really want to also have events for all the things that are truly custom to your game, which is going to be quite a few things. Obviously you don't need to go too crazy with it, but making sure that you have an event for everything which is a significant aspect to your game is important. Completing a level, killing a boss, like in the previous example. You need to have deeper access than most analytics allow. You need to have support for semi-structured data. And when I say semi-structured, that's along the lines of JSON data. Things where in a lot of systems you would have to, if you create a new event, you would have to create a new schema, load that into your backend, and then have it applied so that the data is going in the right way. The really modern data systems that you want to be using, like what I'm going to be showing you here, they don't require that. When you create a new event, it just immediately goes into the back end and the indexing takes place automatically. It doesn't require schematization. And then of course you need tools to easily run experiments without new code. And that's what the A/B test was all about, is giving you the ability to have different A/B test groups that you're able to give different experiences to automatically, because the data's all there. It lives in the back end, and you can just use it through Cloud Script, for example, one of the components that we have in PlayFab. It's just hosted logic that lives in our service. It's available in JavaScript right now, but we'll be giving you a C# version shortly. And then you collect all those events. So everything's coming in as events. It flows in, like I say, you can monitor and visualize it in real time. And then you drive it all into the rules engine. The rules engine are where you create those variations on experience based upon everything you're seeing. And that flows, again, the virtuous cycle here, into the other services that you're using, where you can use that data and then generate more events from those which flow back into the system. And all of this goes out to a data warehouse where you can then access the data for any deep dive investigations that you want to use on the data itself. We provide a number of KPIs. We provide the dashboard where we have your base graphs. We provide a lot of reports that give you all the fundamental KPIs, retention rates, conversion rates, top spenders, spend rates overall. But there's always going to be stuff that requires deep dive investigation because it's specific to the way that your game is played. So like I said, dashboards, updated every 2 minutes. They're all real-time counters. So like I said, all the events coming into PlayFab are coming in real time. There's no significant lag at all to this. And we'll be adding new graphs and counters over time as we develop the service even further. Some of the stuff that we're working with the Azure team right now on, in fact, has to do with some of the machine learning capabilities that they have in Azure. We'll certainly be adding more to the service, new features and functionality, and very likely new graphs that take advantage of all of that. But you can also then go into the real-time event feed as part of the PlayFab Game Manager, which is the tool that you can use to go in and both view the status of your game, the status of your players, work with your players. You can use it as the place where your customer service reps do the sort of make-right operations for anything that goes wrong, granting them virtual currencies, granting them items. But also you can use it to debug all the events coming in real time, because all the data for those events is there. So you can see in this particular case, the raw event, it's a player viewed an ad. So the data there tells you what ad campaign it is, and well, in this case, the fact that they viewed the ad. There's multiple ad events in this case. There's started ad, viewed ad, completed ad. And that's all part of the ad rewarding system that we have in the service as well. And this is an example of a couple of other events. So at the top, you've got a login event for the player. You'll notice that we do a location for the player. That's based on an IP address lookup. But if you want to actually use the straight GPS information from the client, you could do that as well. Because for that, you'd use a custom event. And that's what I'm showing you an example of on the bottom. So the top is an example of a login event built in. The bottom is, in this case, client store visit. So that's a title, in this case, that wanted to have an event that came into the service every time that the player visits one of their stores, to have a look at the things that are on sale. And as you can see, you can apply any custom data in there as well. So you could specify which store it is, whether or not there was an event going on, all that sort of thing. And then you can use all those events to trigger real-time actions. So in this case, it's the event is, let's see, player statistic changed. So whenever an event comes in, you can evaluate that event based upon not just the event name itself, but on each of the parameters. So in this case, the event, they're looking for a specific statistic name. And in this case, it's forum posts. So you could also add a filter in here where you're saying, if the forum post statistic is changed and it's greater than 3, for example, then you know that's somebody who's relatively invested into your community, which I actually have an example of that later in this talk. And then you can do things for that player. So the actions, as you can see in the drop-down here, are things like doing push notifications, sending an email to the player, but you can also do additions of virtual currency or inventory items to the player if you want to. One of the most powerful things in here is that you can actually run a cloud script. There's an actual execute cloud script in here as one of the actions. So you could do any custom action that you want to for the player as well, because cloud script, like I said, hosted logic lives in our service, and it has full access to the server API. So through that, all kinds of options are available to you. And you could, of course, pile in multiple actions into one of these events so that you could send somebody notification that you're giving them a reward and give them the reward all in one. And an example of that would be what we've been doing. If you had an opportunity to visit either the Azure booth, the lobby bar upstairs, or the PlayFab booth itself back in the main expo hall area, we've been doing this game called Unicorn Dash for this particular GDC. And in Unicorn Dash, it's just a simple race game. It plays very much like a sort of a carnival game, where you're trying to get your horse to get to the finish line before the others. And everybody that plays it, they play, and if they get first, second, or third place, they get some unicoins. And then the unicoins are useful to turn in for actual physical prizes, which we have back at the booth, which highly encourage you to stop by after the talk if you still have a few minutes. But the idea here, in this particular case, the rule is when the player purchases an item. So in this case, they've played the game, they've gotten some unicoins, and then they've gone into the store and they've picked an item. We have like chargers, for example. I didn't bring one with me, but we have chargers for USB. Okay, so maybe they bought one of those. So here we got the player purchased the item, and what we're doing is we're saying if the player purchased an item, we're going to send them an email, and the email is what then the person gets, and they show to somebody at the booth to say, hey, I bought this using my unicoins, give me my goods. And so that's what's been going on pretty much throughout the whole conference, is that people will walk up, show their emails, and we give them their prize. But you can also segment users so that you can give them immediate feedback or use their segment as information for long term to get information about their gameplay. So user segmentation can be based on pretty much anything you can track on, whether it's the logins, recency of logins. So if you're looking for creating a user segment for players who haven't logged in some time, really simple to do. You just basically say, player's last login was greater than X amount of time ago. You might want to build out a segment which is players who have invested a certain amount of time in your game. So you might track that by the number of experience points they have. Or, if you are tracking actual hours played, you could go with that. Or the number of multiplayer game sessions they've been in. So you could track on how invested they are in your game, how long it's been since they played, and maybe even whether or not they've spent any money in your game if you have in-app purchases. Because then you have a single segment which identifies your really valuable users. People who played your game, actually paid you something, but haven't played in a while. Those are people that you really, really want to re-engage with and get them to come back into your game. So you could use the segment to create a re-engagement campaign that you drive through a scheduled task in PlayFab. And scheduled tasks can be set up to run on a regular basis so that you have outreach to these players. And it's the same actions you saw before. So you could, for example, you could have a scheduled task where you say, hey, let's send an email to everybody who hasn't played in a couple of days, and give them some free virtual currency and say, hey, we haven't seen you in a while, would like you to come back and play the game, have some money to spend in the game. But as you can see, in terms of user segmentation, like I said, it's pretty much anything you can track on, whether it's statistics, the location of the user, even arbitrary tags, because a tag is just a string value that you apply to the player itself. So, for example, in Unicorn Battle, the game that we showed 2 years ago here at GDC, one of the things that we were showing off was the integration of the games with the forum sites, because community is obviously a huge part of almost any live game these days. So what we showed was players playing the game and then going out to the forum site for the game and posting there as well, because the forum site was also integrated with the PlayFab backend data for the game. So every time somebody posted, it would increment a statistic to say, yes, this person posted again to the forums, great, here's, let's give them another statistic value. And what we did was we created a user segment for active forum users, because let's say, for example, you've got a game which is in development. You're building out your user community, and you want to incentivize people to be active users in the community and to help build that community ahead of your launch. So you can find a few ways to do that, but one of the things you might want to do is let it be known that the more active users will get some kind of rewards in the community. Like if it's some sort of military type game, maybe the people who are the most active in your community are going to be your lieutenants, your captains, your majors, your colonels, your generals. Maybe those are the people who will get some rank once the game is launched, and because they were so much part of the community, be more active immediately by having more authority within the game. It's just sort of a natural way to reward that sort of behavior. But you can use these segments for anything you want to, and it's a great way to personalize the experience. One of the things we like to talk about is getting to the segment of one, which is if you have enough rich segmentation in your game, because every player is going to be in multiple segments based upon all the different things they do in your game. If you have enough rich segmentation of information available, you can vary ways they play the game, you can vary the feedback they get, you can vary who they get partnered with in their game sessions, you can vary the offers you make to them for the stores. And across all of that, what I'm saying is that you're doing enough things different ways for all these different segments that each person is really getting a truly individualized experience. So we've also got, like I say, the Event History Explorer. This is a way for you to filter and look through all your recent events. Gives you the ability to do really easy debugging, especially when you see something go wrong with the title. You can jump in here, you can do filtering on it, you can do grouping. One of the examples we commonly use is we filter it just to the login event, and then we group based upon platform, so that it's a really quick and easy way to see, okay, where are most of my players coming from? But you can also view and export your events. So there's several different mechanisms available for getting events out to you for your own deep dive investigations. And in addition to our own reporting, there's also an email report that we introduced recently, which we're going to be adding more to over time. But there's a tool within the game manager where you can select who within your team actually is going to receive the reports. And we also partner with a number of external services for getting these the data out to you. Things like, we can send data out to S3. For example, you just set up a bucket in S3, we send all of your events out to you in real time, and then you could pull that from there into Redshift. But we also have segment integration, and in fact, we have a Snowflake integration as well. So through this, you can get the data out to wherever you need it to be so that you can do, like I say, those sorts of deep dive investigations on your data. Okay. So with that, looking at the time, I don't want to leave time for the demo at the moment because I think I want to leave time for questions, but I wanted to get to the call of action. It's easy and free to set up an account in PlayFab. By default, when you set up a new account in PlayFab, you're in our free tier, which means you could actually create a game, launch it, go live, have 10 million players, no problem. You wouldn't even need to talk to us. We've actually had a number of titles go live without ever talking to us. It's always funny when that happens too. But yeah, check out the game, hook up just the basics, hook up a login call just to start. That'll light up the dashboard and it'll get you a view of your game in real time in the service and start giving you an idea of ways in which you could utilize PlayFab for your game. And evaluate what it is that makes your game unique, what things you want to track on, what metrics you're already using, what things you might want to track on in future. What do you need in order to make good decisions about your players, your game, how you want to update it, how you want to manage a community over time. And definitely, give us feedback, because we drive a lot of our decision making on the feedback we get from our user community, our developer community. Because realistically, without developers, we got nothing. So yeah, we like to listen to you guys and use that as the determination of what's going to be in our future roadmap. And yeah, if you still have time, this is the other reason I'm going to kind of make it a little bit shorter, because I know we're supposed to be closing down at 3. If you have time, there's a lot of stuff back there at the booth. You can certainly get a quick look at the dashboard, have a look at how things work with the Unicorn Dash game. I actually brought a number of copies of the LiveOps guide up here to give to you guys right now, just in case you don't have time. But there's also some swag still back there if you want to go back and see what we've got and what's still available. All right, so with that, does anybody have any questions? Yeah. Right, so the question is around what are the limits to the rules system. It depends on what tier you're in. If you mean like the number of rules you can have, is that what you mean? Or complexity. Right, so the complexity is basically, the rules are based upon events. And in each one of those, what you're saying is when this event occurs, take these actions. But the thing is, you can filter that by adding in, you could add every single parameter that's in the event as a filtering parameter. You could say, okay, when a login occurs, if the user is in the United States and the time of day is this, so basically any parameter that's part of the event can be part of the filtering mechanism for that rule. So it can be as complex or as simple as you want, frankly.
So are they all and in together, or are they conjunctive?
It's both. There's an and an or mechanism for it. So yeah, you can do both. Sorry, I should have repeated the question. Is it conjunctive? Is it an and? It is, of course, and or. Okay. Any others? I'm sorry, I can barely hear you.
Are you able to deploy locally hosted instances?
Oh, I see. Can you deploy, you're talking about deploying PlayFab in a locally hosted instance? No. PlayFab is a vast architecture and it uses a lot of services. What we can do is, if you want to talk to us about an enterprise solution, we can actually launch PlayFab in a distinct service, in a distinct region for you, a distinct AWS account, effectively. Right now it runs as a shared service. So we've got there's about 1,400, it's a little over 1,400 live titles in PlayFab. It's about 83 million monthly active users. The majority of those 1,400 titles are in our shared service. There are a few who run in private verticals, but that's generally speaking, it's an enterprise level thing. In at least one case, it's because there's a company that wants to run an exclusive set of PlayFab running just their titles, specifically in Ireland. And this is because they're concerned about GDPR. But I will say right now, we've done extensive work on privacy. We have COPPA compliant games running in PlayFab, and we'll be completely GDPR compliant by the May 25th deadline, actually ahead of the May 25th deadline, technically. So we're really not concerned about that. But yeah, I mean, if you want to be belt and suspenders, yeah, we could run it in Ireland as well. All right, anything else? All right, let me give you a copy of these books and we can get you guys back there to the back area.